Hello everyone, welcome to the Healthy Eating Research, HER, Nutrition Guidelines and Nutrition Policy Training. This presentation is intended to help CFBNJ's staff gain a better understanding of the HER guidelines and ranking system, as well as CFBNJ's nutrition policy and our goals for inventory. The key takeaways from this presentation are to define the nutrition policy and HER guidelines, provide background on CFBNJ's nutrition policy and HER guidelines, explain what the HER ranking mean, and go over the key nutrients that determine the rankings, provide examples of foods in each category and how they are ranked, demonstrate the relationship between HER food categories and Feeding America F2E categories, and then summarize CFBNJ's nutrition policy and our targets for inventory. First, it is important to explain the difference between nutrition policy and the HER guidelines. A nutrition policy is a formal guiding document to outline food procurement and distribution practices and policies to ensure access to nutritious and appropriate food, whereas the HER guidelines provide clear, specific, measurable guidelines based on food's level of saturated fat, sodium, and added sugar. This helps food banks to rank their food to improve nutritional quality. Think of the nutrition policy as our framework that drives our decision-making, and the HER guidelines are a tool in that framework. Now I want to provide background on the HER guidelines and how it was developed. Later on, we will discuss CFBNJ's nutrition policy. The national program Healthy Eating Research has been around for about 2 decades. In 2019, they decided to gather a panel of experts in charitable food systems, nutrition, and food policy to create a set of nutritional guidelines that were tailored to the specific needs of food banks and pantries. The intent of this panel was to create a research-based recommendations that provided the quality of foods within the charitable food systems. The focus is primarily on 3 key nutrients to limit: saturated fat, sodium, and added sugar, based on evidence that links increased consumption of these nutrients to an increased risk for diet-related chronic diseases. The full report was released in March of 2020. Once the HER guidelines were developed, a Feeding America task force reviewed them and have since been actively promoting this ranking system. Feeding America encourages their network of food banks to adopt HER guidelines and have created a nutrition and food banking toolkit to help food banks implement these guidelines. So why do we need nutritional guidelines, and how do they benefit CFBNJ? One of the biggest benefits is that by centering our food sourcing strategies on health, it helps our food insecure neighbors who are at greater risk for developing diet-related chronic diseases. Having guidelines in place allows for a more standardized approach for food sourcing and prioritizing nutrition options. Despite staffing or organizational changes, that the guidelines stay consistent. Existing nutritional ranking systems throughout charitable food systems can be quite complicated for food sourcing teams. The HER guidelines have a more simplistic approach by focusing only on 3 key nutrients. It also creates a common definition of healthy foods across charitable food systems, which is important as it allows for easier decision-making throughout the procurement process. Now we will dive into more specifics of the HER ranking system. The HER ranking system was developed to limit specific key nutrients that have been linked to decreasing the nutritional value of foods. The panel decided to focus on 3 key nutrients and created 3 categories for the thresholds for each nutrient within each food category. The categories are choose often, which you will see represented as green, choose sometimes, which you will see represented as yellow, and choose rarely, which you will see represented as red. Here is a quick overview of the rankings defined. Choose often would be considered foods that should be eaten regularly to maintain a nutritious diet. For example, all fresh produce, clean water, non-fat 1% or 2% milk will always be choose often ranked. Choose sometimes is defined as foods that should be eaten occasionally due to their moderate levels of one of the key nutrients. Some examples of choose sometimes food would be white bread, white rice, and whole milk. And lastly, choose rarely is considered to be foods that should be eaten less often because they are high in one or more of the three key nutrients. A couple examples of these food items would be sodas, all desserts, and most processed snacks. There are three key nutrients that the HER guidelines focus on to rank foods: sodium, added sugars, and saturated fats. The HER guidelines center on these three key nutrients because evidence-based research has shown that by limiting foods with these ingredients can reduce the risk of chronic diseases. These guidelines also align with the recommendations by the USDA's Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2020 to 2025. So why were the limits for key nutrients determined? The limits for each of the three key nutrients are defined specifically for each food category. The HER panel nutrient limits are based upon existing research and standards that promote nutritious diets, like the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The goal for setting these nutrient limits is to guide food banks and pantries to offer healthier food choices. The HER guidelines have 11 food categories as opposed to the 31 Feeding America Foods to Encourage categories that our food bank is familiar with. The 11 HER food categories include fruits and vegetables, grains, protein, dairy, non-dairy alternatives, beverages, mixed dishes, processed and packaged snacks, desserts, condiments and cooking staples, and lastly, miscellaneous. Here is a comparison of the HER categories to the 31 F2E categories. Each HER category encompasses several F2E categories. I'll open our link to the PDF to see the table a little larger. Here's the table. For example, the HER protein category replaces meat, fish, poultry, and non-meat protein F2E categories. So you can see right here. And then for grains, it's a lot more encompassing in the HER categories compared to it's grains, dough, bread, rice, pasta, and cereal for the F2E categories. So here you can see how it is all divided. This PDF will also be in your reference materials for the takeaway packet that will be given to you at the end of the presentation. Here, so next is the full HER guidelines. We'll click the link to get a larger view of the PDF, which will also be available in your reference material. We will be diving into each category and the nutrient limits coming up in our training. For now, just understand that the table is divided into 11 food categories, and then the three HER rankings within each ranking are the limits for each of the key nutrients. To decide where a food would rank, you would determine which food category it falls into, then use the nutrition label to identify the amount of the key nutrients. An item will always be ranked depending on its highest nutrient. For example, if a product is within the limit for saturated fat and added sugar within the choose often category, but the sodium is too high for the choose often category, it is within the choose something category, then that food will be ranked as choose sometimes. I'm going to go to that PDF now. Here is it a little bit bigger. and we'll go through each one individually in this slide. But as you can see, desserts will always be none and none for choose often and choose sometimes, and all desserts are in the choose rarely category. Then condiments and cooking staples and miscellaneous products are always unranked. Here's just a quick reference on how to check nutrition labels for the key nutrients. Nutrition labels are typically found on the back of food products and generally have standardized layouts. Nutrition labels always reference the amount of nutrients in one serving. We're going to be looking specifically at saturated fat, sodium, and added sugars. Another tip to remember, sometimes a nutrition label will provide two sets of numbers, one for as packaged and one for as prepared. For the HER ranking, use the as packaged set of numbers. Here you can also see where on the nutrition labels saturated fat, sodium, and included sugars typically are. Now we'll discuss how to identify whole grain products. As a first step, check the packaging for 100% whole grain stamp. Next, check in the ingredients list. If the first item on the ingredient list contains the words enriched, refined, bleached, or polished, that means it typically is not considered a whole grain. Whereas if the first item on the label has whole in it, it can typically safely be classified as whole grain. We also have here a list of common whole grains to look for on the ingredient list. There can be confusion around sugar when reading a nutrition label. So what's the difference between total sugar and added sugar? First, it's important to understand that many foods have naturally present sugars. They are part of the food. For example, all dairy, fruits, and vegetables have naturally occurring sugars. Added sugars, however, are added into food products through processing. Total sugar refers to the natural and added sugars combined for that food product. Many foods contain both added and natural sugars. For HER ranking, we are focused on added sugar. If the added sugars are not listed individually on the nutrition labels, total sugars will then be used to determine the ranking. We also have some common examples of ingredients that are added sugar, like cane sugar, corn sugar, maple syrup, and the rest. Now we are going to review each of the 11 food categories to go over common examples for each of the rankings and the key nutrient limits. It's helpful to understand some items that will always be ranked into the tiers because we don't need to go hunting down the nutrition facts. We can just rank them. There are, of course, always going to be some items that we need to investigate the nutrition facts to find out more. For fruits and vegetables, some examples of choose often options would be all fresh produce, canned fruits or vegetables with no added ingredients, salad mix with just the mix, not including any dressing, mix-ins, or proteins, frozen vegetables or fruits with no added ingredients. And then some examples of fruits and vegetables that would always be considered choose sometimes are 100% juice, dried fruits with no added sugar. And then some examples of choose rarely items in this category would be most canned fruits and syrup, and then dried fruits with added sugar. Items that we need to check the label include mashed potatoes, guacamole, spreads, dips, tomato sauce, canned vegetables, and fruits with salt or syrup. Here's just an overview of the nutrient limits. For grains, some examples of choose often options would be quinoa, brown rice, whole wheat pasta, barley, stone, ground grits, and farina. Some whole grain breads, the sodium would need to be checked, and some whole grain cereals, the added sugars would need to be checked. And then plain oatmeal, is always choose often. And then some examples that would be considered choose sometimes are white dry or fresh pasta, rice without seasoning, grits, couscous, and most pastas and breads. And some examples of choose rarely items in this category are some rice or pasta with salt-based seasoning and most sugary cereals. Items that need nutrition label review include breakfast cereals, granola, dough, muffins, scones, and pancakes. These are the nutrient limits for each of the HER rankings for grains. Now we're moving on to our protein category. Choose often items include dried beans, eggs, and low sodium canned beans. Some examples of choose sometimes foods would be most regular canned fish, peanut butter, canned beans, not low sodium, ground beef that is 90% lean and 10% fat. And then choose rarely foods include 80% lean and 20% fat ground beef, bacon, and sausage. Items that nutrition label review include meats like chicken, fish, turkey, and beef, and then pork and beans. Here is the overview of the nutrient limits for the HER protein rankings. Now we are on to the food category of dairy. Choose often foods include fat-free or low-fat unsweetened yogurt, fat-free 1% and 2% milk. Choose sometimes foods include plain whole milk and then some reduced fat cheese. And choose rarely includes regular fat and sweetened yogurts. And then items that you need to check the nutrition label to see flavored milk, yogurts, and cheese. These are the nutrient limits for the HER rankings for dairy. Now, as you can see, for non-dairy alternatives, there aren't any examples for choose sometimes and choose rarely ranks. Most of the unsweetened oat, rice, cashew, soy, and almond milk will be considered choose often. Many products in this category will be variable, so we want to check the label to see if they are choose sometimes or choose rarely. Here are the nutrient limits for each of the HER rankings for non-dairy alternatives. For the sixth HER category, we have beverages. Beverages that are always in the choose often category would be water and unsweetened sparkling water and unsweetened iced tea. Some examples of beverages that you would find in the choose sometimes ranking category include most coconut water, although the label should still be checked as some can contain added sugars, diet sodas, and soft drinks. Choose rarely beverages include soda, soft drinks, and most sweetened energy drinks. One important note for beverages is that 100% juice is categorized in the fruit and vegetable category. Not 100% fruit and vegetable juices fall into beverages. These are the nutrient limits for each of the HER rankings for beverages. Now, mixed dishes are tricky. There are no common examples for each ranking as they can vary tremendously depending on the product contents. Some products that fall in the mixed dishes category are pasta sauces, soups, mac and cheese, rice dishes, chili, and stew. It is important to look at the nutrition labels on these products to determine what rank they fall into. These are the nutrient limits for each of the HER rankings for mixed dishes. The next food category is processed foods and snacks. As you can see, no foods within this category are ranked as choose often. Some snacks can be ranked as choose sometimes if it is a whole grain snack with the first ingredient is whole grain. Again, For these, if you are unsure of their rank, you can check the nutrition label and see where they fit in. These are the nutrient limits for each of the HER rankings for processed and packaged snacks. The 9th HER food category is desserts. This category is very straightforward as desserts are always ranked as choose rarely. Examples include cookies, candy, chocolate, and cakes. There are no nutrient limits for this category. Condiments and cooking staples like flour, sugar, and baking soda are always unranked as they don't make up a substantial part of the diet. There are no nutrient limits for this category as well. The miscellaneous food category is also always unranked and mainly covers baby food and formula or nutrition supplements. There are a few ways to check a food's ranking. In addition to the HER guidelines chart, we have a list of foods that always rank in one of the categories that will be available in your reference packets. I also wanted to share an online HER ranking database called WellScan that allows you to quickly look up HER rankings of common USDA foods. Here is a link to access the website, and there is a quick overview on how to use WellScan in your takeaway packet as well. When you go to the WellScan website, click the search. Here, I'll show you. I'll click the link. So when you go to the WellScan website, you click the search link at the top, and there you can search featured to look up USDA item codes or just search by name of the food. It will provide you with the HER ranking. So you click this, and then I am going to give you an example of the USDA code for cheddar cheese. We look it up if we have it available. And see, cheddar cheese and shredded refrigerated will be choose sometimes. And then just for one more example, I'm doing cranberry juice. So again, as you can see, it pulls up a bunch of stuff, a bunch of juices and different examples, but this is the USDA code that I use for cranberry juice, and it will be choose sometimes as well. Here we have a background and timeline details on the development of CFBNJ's nutrition policy. In 2022, research began to initiate our nutrition policy, where an interdepartmental steering committee, including team members from each department, collaborated to draft a policy that worked for the goals of our food bank. In 2023, the draft was submitted to both internal and external stakeholders for feedback. The feedback allowed for further development of the nutrition policy. In July 2024, the nutrition policy was published and adopted by CFBNJ. Since launching the policy officially, we've continued to monitor the inventory to analyze our rankings and progress towards our HER goals. We recently had a Power BI dashboard developed to streamline the process and are excited to start using it to dive even deeper into our inventory data. Here we have the key elements of our nutrition policy. At a high level, the nutrition policy outlines our commitment to providing foods that meet the needs of our neighbors related to health concerns, cultural considerations, and food preferences. Our nutrition policy also outlines the CFBNJ will deprioritize in the following food categories by not directly purchasing or seeking donations of these items. These foods include mechanically separated meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, desserts, and choose rarely foods. The nutrition policy's goal is that 90% of purchased inventory is a combination of choose often or choose sometimes category. We developed this goal by analyzing the average HER rankings of our inventory from 2018 to 2023, where we found that our baseline for choose often and choose sometimes purchase inventory was about 92%. As of March 12, 2025, we are at 97.85% of purchase inventory being in the choose often and choose sometimes category. So while we've already exceeded our goal, it's important to continue to analyze the inventory to see what our strengths are and where we have even more room to grow and provide nourishing foods. Our goal is to consistently meet this target by June of 2026. Using our new dashboard, we've now able to visualize the trends of our targets for inventory and see just how much we've increased from our 2024 to our 2025 fiscal year. Thank you everyone for coming to the HER Guidelines Trading presentation. This presentation and the reference packet will be shared out following today's meeting. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Erin Long at elong@cfbnj.org. Thank you again.